everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Women Serve Too. Thank you so much for joining. Today we have Michelle Poitier, also known as Michelle Speaks with a Z. So she is an experienced and dedicated transformational speaker and life coach, committed to guiding individuals on a transfer towards emotional healing, empowerment, and the restoration of our voices. So she's also a United States veteran of the Navy intelligence community with 13 years of honorable service. She's also a mother and grandmother, and if you look at her, you would have never guessed. And she's also a leader. She is a nature and a mouthpiece for recovery and reconciliation to the community she serves. So Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to share the platform with you and be able to be a voice for, our fellow women veterans that have served and those that are active duty.
Yeah, we were talking beforehand and you were saying you're very involved with the veteran community. So we'll obviously talk about that. But as a veteran yourself, tell us a little bit about your journey and your service and what made you decide to become a coach.
Actually, so my journey was very interesting. What motivated me was honestly my lived experiences prior to and during and after my military service. And during the time that I joined, I was following a family tradition. My mother had been in served for 22 plus years. My stepfather had been in, I believe he was still in when I transitioned out. But mainly I wanted to recreate myself because I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. I mean, a lot of families encounter that, but what I found with women is that we have a tendency to be quiet about it, to be silent about it. And what I experienced growing up and even in my military career was that being silent caused me to be ill, physically, mentally, emotionally, and every other way. And so I joined the military as a way to escape, to reinvent myself because I wanted to escape that dysfunction and I wanted to redefine who Michelle was and what Michelle could be. And so going into the military, that was my goal. And I've always had a heart to serve. Like I'm a servant at heart. I love serving others. I love being involved in my community. I just love serving. And what better way to serve than to serve our country? And so, that was my motivation, my incentive to join. After getting into the military, I joined, what they consider one of the elite fields was, I was in intel and, I could tell you some more, but then, I'd have to come find you and take you out, Brittany. Right. And so I joined, and at my first duty station, I encountered something that I did not expect to encounter because I'd heard such, and I grew up in the military, I didn't hear anything about any negative experiences and things that went on. And so I was actually sexually violated at my first duty station by a fellow service member. And I was encouraged not to pursue it when I let it be known to my chain of command. And because I was overseas and, by myself for the first time, even though I had, served with my mom and I graduated from high school overseas, but being active duty by myself was so far away from family, I just didn't advocate for myself. And so for me, I was running from trauma and I ran right into more trauma. And so that was my motivation for creating and supporting the women that I do now after service, women veterans and women that have encountered either domestic violence, sexual assault, military sexual trauma, or mental health challenges secondary to trauma. Because I tried to succeed my way through in the military as a way of channeling that pain and my experiences. And that worked for a while, but then it started to break down. And then I married a service member thinking, that he was going to be my protector because he was formidable, 6'4", built like a brick wall. So in my mind, you got to get to him, go through him to get to me. So, I saw him as my protector, but he had his own challenges. And so it was a very combustive marriage. And I was married to him for 20 years, but it was very combustive. I've encountered some domestic violence and some sexual violence as well. So it was like compounded trauma. And it got to the point that I just couldn't function anymore. I started not showing up for work. And, if you do that in the military, there's consequences. I started getting ill, had a heart condition, and, I had to get out. And I just realized, I cannot do this anymore. So what do I need to do to make a change? Because, I just broke down. I was diagnosed with 5 mental health conditions and, attempted to end my life 5 times. And I felt broken. I felt damaged. I felt like I was no longer viable to myself, my family, or the community until I began the pathway to doing the inner work and getting the inner healing. And then I realized that I can't be alone in this. And I've always been a fighter, and I lost my fight and I lost my voice. And I just made up my mind. I'm silence no more because silence breeds sickness. So that is my why.
I am so sorry that you had to deal with that. I couldn't imagine. And to kind of have to deal with that all by yourself, like you're your leadership pretty much told you to just shut up and move forward.
Right.
And so how did you process it? You talked about, that inner healing, and it almost sounds like you also had that self-realization, like, I need to do something.
Yeah.
What was that breaking point, and like, what did you do to help yourself?
Well, initially, I didn't process it. That was part of the problem. I tried to exercise it away. I tried to be successful in everything I put my hands to. I tried to be the best mother, the best wife, the best sailor. And then I hit this brick wall, this proverbial glass ceiling that I often talk about when I speak and as a coach. And I just got to the point where, I cannot go another day. I need a way out. I was tired. I was exhausted. I was mentally, physically, emotionally just spent. And, I had a crisis of faith because I am a woman of faith, but I no longer believe because I'm like, why, God, would you allow all of this to happen? And so when I got to the point that when I had my fifth failed suicide attempt, I realized, Michelle, you can't drink this away. You can't ignore this away. You can't exercise this away. You have to get help. And so I started to go through counseling, through therapy. And I almost walked away from that because, depending on the level of trauma that you've experienced, or if you have compounded trauma, some forms of therapy are more detrimental than they are helpful. And you just have to have the strength to be able to advocate for yourself. And it was during that process that I rediscovered the strength that we all innately have within. There's a resiliency that is within all of us. And I tapped into that. And I began to advocate for myself the way that I advocated for everyone else, because I was like, if I don't do this, I'm not coming back up. And then I wanted to be that example to my daughter. So that was what charged me to know that I have to address this. I can no longer ignore it. I can't pretend that it didn't happen. And then, realizing that after I started the therapy and started recognizing the patterns, I started recognizing my fear. My fear was being exposed. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed, when they labeled me with all those mental health issues, because I'm ashamed to say this, but my idea of someone with mental illness at the time was homeless, disheveled, toothless. They had a look in my mind. And then being labeled with that, there's such a stigma that's associated with mental illness. And I wanted to dispel that. And I wanted to create a safe environment for women to really begin to be able to be vulnerable, to heal. Because as women, we are pivotal in the lives of so many others. We're mothers, we're leaders, we're lovers, we're friends. We instill in our children their morals and their values. And if we have dysfunction that we haven't addressed or don't know about, then we're pouring that dysfunction into our children, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And I didn't want that for my daughter. I wanted to end that cycle. Because again, I experienced some trauma before going into the military from the family, because in my family, children were to be seen and not heard. And there's things that we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about mental health. We didn't talk about, incest or sexual assault or anything like that. So I had become a professional chameleon. I had learned to suppress to survive until I couldn't anymore, because this is the thing about trauma. You can only suppress it for so long before it begins to manifest in other ways, destructive ways, either promiscuity or substance abuse issues or alcohol abuse issues or shopping issues, whatever it may be. It's going to come up, or it manifests in your body as illness. And that's what happened to me. It was a combination of that. And so that was what started me on the journey. I knew that I had to heal if I wanted to live, and I had to live because I had a daughter to raise.
Oh my goodness. I have so many questions, because first off, you're such a strong woman to want to seek help. I feel like, especially when we're going through that, like you said, women tend to be ashamed that it happened to them. And so they don't want to seek help, let alone, break the silence and speak out about this.
The shame and the blame game. We blame ourselves, because of what we've been told, how we've been raised.
So what inspired you to be like, you're already going through the counseling, you're already doing the inner healing, but what inspired you to be like, you know what, I also want to advocate for other women who are experiencing this?
So part of my journey to healing and therapy was journaling. And I've always loved to write. And as I began to write, I felt like I was releasing layer by layer, because healing is a journey. It's not a destination. Just like there's layers to forgiveness, there's layers to healing. And the more I began to release it through writing, journaling, the better I began to feel in addition to talking through it. But one of the other things that I was ashamed of was showing weakness, crying, because in the military, of course, the objective is to complete the mission. Anything else you got going on, that's secondary. And so I had become so accustomed to suppressing that when these emotions started coming up, I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know how to be. And so as I started writing, I realized I can't be alone in this. I can't be alone in this. And so I started sharing little by little. I was a part of a ministry, and we had a monthly women's tea. And so during one event, I was asked to come up and share a little bit. And I just started being transparent. I talked about how I was violated, in the military, and prior to how I was in a domestic violence situation, how my husband had played Russian roulette with me, put a gun to my head, and he was a fellow service member, and pulled the trigger. He spun the chamber and pulled the trigger. And so as I began sharing, the number of women that started coming forward, and they ranged in age from, and it's okay, emotions are meant to be expressed, not suppressed. That's part of the issue. I believe that we as women, we put on this mask of strength when inside, we're hurting, we're dying. And I couldn't live like that anymore. And I wanted to create a safe place because I couldn't find one. And I tried. I tried going through the VA, whole bunch of challenges within the VA. It's pretty much a male dominated culture, even within the system, the healthcare system. And so it was just, I was like, I am not going to let this get the best of me. I want to live. I realized that the times that I tried to take my life, it wasn't because I didn't want to live. It was because I didn't want to continue to carry that pain around in silence. And I just needed a way to release it. And so when I did that, and I saw the number of women that came forward, women going into their 70s and 80s were coming forward crying, and was like, it happened to me too. It happened to me too. It happened to me too. And then I thought it was a journal that I was creating. I was journaling, but it ended up being my first book, Releasing the Pain. And so that began the journey to me wanting to help other women to heal, because if I help women heal, then I'm helping communities, families, and nations heal one woman at a time. Because men, are the leaders or the head, but women are the next by which the head turns. And if we're dysfunctional, because a man will listen to a woman that he trusts. But if a woman is full of dysfunction and pain and trauma that's unresolved, then, it becomes a vicious cycle. And so I wanted to end that, not only for my family, but for the women that were following me. And the more that I shared, the more I realized that I was not alone. And the more I realized, the more strength that I displayed by sharing, it gave other women the courage to speak up and to speak out, and to understand that they had a right to have a voice, and they had a right to have boundaries, and then realizing that it was not their fault and that it had nothing to do with them. It was all about power and control. And so that was why that was, and the way that I started seeing the changes within, not just in the ministry within my church, but as I began to speak locally, the changes that I saw within the community. I became a part of NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. I became one of their speakers and facilitators. So, everything's connected. You can't isolate your traumas from your personal life, your professional life, your spiritual life. It's all interwoven. And so the umbrella of that is the state of our mental wellness, our mental health. And if we don't deal with that, then we have a breakdown in other areas, in our financial life, in our relationships, in our spiritual life, in our mental, emotional life. And so I just wanted to take the blinders off, because silence breeds sickness, and I didn't want to be silent anymore.
Do you feel like being more vocal also helped with kind of the dealing with the trauma aspect? Like,
most definitely. And I realized that because as I became to the point that I was healed enough to go back and help others, I started getting into certified and taking courses and certifications, and learning more about the impact of trauma and the different ways that you can heal from trauma, which is movement and art and other forms of therapy. Like, our body holds trauma, and we have to be able to release it, not just through talking, but through moving it, releasing it where it's been lodged. And so as I began to learn about that and started to incorporate it in my life, and I saw the changes and how other people around me recognized the changes, I realized that I wanted to create an environment for other women like that. And so that's what I did. And that's what I continue to do. And so it's create that environment where it's safe. And I absolutely, Brittany, love acronyms because it's easier to remember. And so one of my acronyms is UNMASK. So unmask the hurt within, to nurture the longing within, to manifest your dreams, goals, and desires, to truly come alive, to be safe to be you, to attract the kindred connections that were already ordained before you were born. So unmask. I believe that women need a place where they can give and receive love, be seen, and be heard. I think those are the three things that drive humanity, especially women. And often we aren't heard because we're groomed to nurture, not to take care of ourselves. And especially as we begin to age, we become visibly invisible. And so I wanted to break that stigma, not just for mental illness, but as we grow older, becoming invisible because others feel like society feels like we're no longer viable, we're no longer attractive, we're no longer, whatever society or the media portrays. I wanted to diminish that image of women.
So for like the women that, you're creating the safe space, but they're afraid to, speak out. Like, how did you overcome any internal or external obstacles to become more vocal?
So my internal obstacles, I anchor back to, I started doing the inner work. I started going to therapy. I started actively doing the activities and the exercises that I was assigned. Externally, I found a community of support because it's important to know on the journey as you heal, you're going to need support. It's not something that you're going to be able to do alone because there's going to be times where you have setbacks. And if you are not accountable to anyone, it's easy to isolate. It's easy to revert back to the things, the behaviors that you engaged in before because there's no accountability and there's no community. You don't feel like you're supported. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I created an environment to help women feel safe, by being a listening ear. But also knowing that I can't just be a listening ear. I have to have viable solutions just as I needed and I demanded viable solutions when I was going through. And so, just creating that safe place. So in doing the inner work internally and then externally creating and making myself be accountable to a community of support. And I didn't necessarily have a big community. It was 1 or 2, 3 people at the most that supported me. I had a word, that I would share with them if I was not okay. We had check-ins, if I went 3 days and we didn't communicate, they knew that it was time to check in, to find out what was going on. And I gave myself grace. I knew that I wasn't going to be okay every day. And I accepted that. And that was a journey in and of itself, just accepting that it is what it is. I am where I am today, not in agreement with why I was that way, but just accepting that this is what it is today. And I extended some compassion because we're so quick to be compassionate to other people, but we're often so critical of ourselves. And then I continued to educate myself on what I needed to do to be able to move forward and to continue to heal. So there's another acronym, ACE, acceptance, compassion, and education. And I just extended compassion and I learned to listen, not to respond, but to understand, not just others, but myself.
So you also mentioned like the whole like self-critical, like self-criticism. I'm the type of person who like, it's hard for me to do kind of like talk therapy or anything in like a group because I'm like, well, it's my issues. I'm going to keep to myself. What would you tell these women who are struggling but are afraid to join a community or to rely on someone or to depend on someone for that accountability?
So for that woman that is straddling the fence, that knows that you need help but you're afraid to let your guard down and trust, I would first say to you to trust yourself. Because a lot of times our trust is stripped. Our trust in ourselves is stripped because we go through this mental war of I should have seen it, why didn't I feel it? Why did I allow myself to be in that situation? So to that woman, I would say, you are not alone in your feelings, but don't allow your feelings to paralyze you. Use those feelings to cause you to reach out. Remember the previous victories that you've had in your life and anchor back to that. And you don't have to join a community if you're not ready. Find one person. Look through your whatever of friends and identify one person that you know that you can be completely vulnerable, transparent, and authentic with. And there's no judgment there. We've all got at least one. It may take us a while to kind of think about it or bring it back to our memory, but there's at least one person that we can turn to, that we can talk to, that we can go to. Reach out to that one person and then establish a plan that you two have to hold you accountable.
So for the women who want to start off with like that inner work that you did, do you have like any suggestions? I know you said journaling, but do you have like any suggestions or like resources where women can kind of turn to start that journey?
Right. So for those, depending on what your trauma is, or if it's compound trauma like mine, one of the organizations that was very instrumental to me was RAIN, RAINN. And that's for women that have experienced domestic violence. And they have a plethora of resources and they're free. And then if it's mental health and you don't want, if you're still active duty and you don't want to get the military involved for whatever reason, then there's NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. And it's a nonprofit and they have a plethora of programs and resources and they're all free. But they help your family members or your significant others to navigate the process of how best to help you on your journey. There's some other organizations, and myself as well. I have an organization, Michelle Speaks with a Z. If you hide it, you can't heal it. I offer both individual coaching as well as group coaching, and it's hybrid, it's online, or, it's present depending on where you're located. Because oftentimes you're not going to begin the journey to healing unless you feel safe. And then, you feel safe in the comfort of your own home. And so I have an Empowered to Thrive community. It's virtual and it's closed and it's vetted. So, vetted very well because I believe in being a steward of women that are encountering, on the journey to healing, because I know that I encountered some challenges that set me back because I was mishandled. And so, my thing is to do no harm. So, Michelle Speaks with a Z. If you hide it, you can't heal it. I'm sure, Brittany, you'll have all the links and everything. But those resources, if you're ready to begin the journey, I encourage you to really sit with it for a couple of days and identify at least one person that can help you, because it's going to be challenging and you don't want to begin alone. And then let them know, that you may have setbacks and specifically how they can support you. So if you're ready to begin the journey, just reach out to those organizations. If you don't want it, if you don't want anyone that's close to you to know, reach out to RAIN.org. If it's been domestic violence, reach out to NAMI or Mental Health America. There's a plethora, but these are organizations that I know that I've been a part of for years and that I've vetted, and I feel comfortable and safe, sharing them as a resource, because I never want to cause anybody to have any setbacks unnecessarily.
I also agree with NAMI. I follow them. I support them. They are a really good resource.
Mm-hmm.
I know they have charters too. So you could also look into your state or community to see if they do have like a charter where you could actually physically go.
Right. If you go to their main website, I think you can type in your city and state or your state, and it'll give you, the different divisions that they have, and just find the closest one next to you. And what's good, since we pivoted during the pandemic, is they also have virtual programs, and so again, you can heal from the comfort of your own home, as well as getting out and getting connected and getting involved. And then depending on the depth of the trauma that you've encountered, I encourage you to get a therapist, but vet that therapist and establish a relationship, because everything is based on rapport and relationship. And so there's no shame in having a therapist, especially with the work that I do. I have a therapist and I'll probably have one for the rest of my life. But my life is better. It's more enriching. It's more fulfilling. I don't feel like I want to end my life anymore. And I haven't felt like that for years. But also incorporating healthy routines and regimens. Like, even if you don't feel like moving every day, get outside and get connected with nature at least 5 to 10 minutes a day. Move your body, whether you feel like it or whether you're not. And you can implement some simple tools to make sure that you do. Because there are some days that I don't feel like getting out of bed. But you know what I do? I set my phone to have the alarm go off. And I put the phone across the room, so I have to get up out of the bed. And then, they have so many resources. I had a service dog for about 13 years. And so I utilized the resources that were available. So get connected. That is what I will tell you. Get connected, whether it's one individual, whether it's a group of individuals, whether it's a community, whether it's an organization. Get connected.
Community is so huge. It is like, once you have that community, you can kind of build on it. And again, by sharing stories, you never know who you're inspiring. You never know who you're motivating. And just by empowering someone to state their own voice or their own story, have you experienced like positive changes or a shift in mindset as a result from like sharing your story?
I have. It is hardwired in our DNA for connection. The root word of community is commune. And if we allow our mind to run rampant and to ruminate on all of the things that have happened, then it gets stuck in that cycle. And so it has shifted my mindset, because I was pretty much a loner because of my experience in early childhood and even going into the military. But when I began to connect and when I began to really connect with others and become a part of a community, my mindset shifted, because I realized that I am not my trauma. I am more than my trauma. My trauma does not define me. It refined me And I was able to tap into my CPR, which is, I coined another acronym. So commitment. I committed to going through and growing through the pain. And then I was persistent and persevering and going through and growing through the pain. And then I tapped into the resilience that we all have within to continue to go through and grow through the pain. And I saw the dynamics of my relationships change, my friendships, my intimate relationships, because it was years before I would even entertain the thought of, having a significant other, because I felt like I was damaged goods and I didn't want to add that burden to anybody. So just remember the resilience that we all have innately within, because oftentimes it's our pain that helps us to identify our passion, which helps us to discover our purpose within, which helps us to walk in power. And when we're walking in power, we can go and empower others. And so if I had anything to say, I would say that just commit to going through it. It's going to be bad. Society, I believe, has brainwashed us into pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain. But oftentimes it's our pain points that cause us to make healthy changes. And so, if you're interested in following me to be inspired, there's 3 pillars that I go by. It's identifying the barriers to emotional healing, because everything is rooted to an emotion that comes from within. Ending the shame of silence by cleansing false belief systems, because everything is based on a belief system. And restoring our voices, your voice, by setting and sustaining healthy boundaries, because often our boundaries have been crossed before we realized we could have a boundary, or because we were overpowered, out of fear, physically, mentally, emotionally. So using those 3 pillars, identify your barriers to healing and living the abundant life that you desire. End the shame of silence and restore your voice, because you're worth it. And, oftentimes as women in the military, having served, that transition from going to military life to civilian life is tough anyway, because we're having to redefine who we are, who our identity is. We're no longer a sailor or a soldier. We're a woman looking for a new career or a new identity. We're more than just mothers. We're more than just servant leaders. We just redefining and reshaping who you are. What are your likes? What are your dislikes? What makes you happy? What do you want to do in this life? What kind of impact do you want to leave? So redefining our life is a continual process. And for that, we need a community of support, mentors, mentees. We need that. We need each other.
Right. Yes, I completely agree. Because you're right. Like when we transition from being in the military to, that civilian life, whether it's separation or retirement, it ends up being like a, who am I? And, you do feel lost, but, having someone to, help you through that journey, it does make it a lot better. You mentioned it's a journey, and obviously, it's going to always be a journey, and I don't want to put this like it's a timestamp type of thing, but how long did it take you to, do all of that inner work and, healing to like start seeing a difference in your mentality and your approach?
So that's a loaded question, because, you think you've attained a certain level of healing until you hit a trigger point. And then you realize, okay, there's a little bit more work that I have to go back and do. So healing is a continual journey. So I'm still on the journey. I haven't arrived. That's why I say it's a journey. It's not a destination, but I'm better than I was before, because I have tools that I've gained along the way that I can use, that I can anchor back to. And so just as life is a journey, just as recovery is a journey, if you're recovering from addictions or substance abuse or whatever your addiction of choice is, healing is going to be a journey, but it doesn't have to be the sole totality sum of who you are and what your life is. You can continue to explore, the dimensions and levels of who you are and who you want to be. And then when you hit a barrier, okay, I need to focus on this area of healing. Okay, what tools do I have in my toolkit? What tools do I need to add, or what tools do I need to shift or change? And so it's a journey. It's a life of discovery. Healing is self-discovery for me. And I believe for those, because you think you're healed and you're whole until you hit something. And so when I got to the point that I was comfortable in that journey, I would say it took me, I think I wandered around trying to figure out who I was after the military for about 5 years. And I'm not saying that it's going to take somebody else that long. That's just how long it took me. I think it's unique to every individual, but it's worth it. So if you remember nothing else, know that it's worth it, because you are worth it, because you are worthy, no matter what anybody has said to you. We all have that inner drive within. That's why we join the military. So tap back into that. Remember who you are. Journal and take note of your previous victories and your previous, I love inspirational things because I believe I'm a visual person. So, I put things up on my wall and I keep lots of photos and videos because when I'm having a hard time, I anchor back to the good times to remind me that I've been here before, because there's peaks, there's valleys, there's ebbs, there's flows. And I have to remind myself sometimes this is temporary. This shall pass. And if I feel like this is not temporary, I reach out to my accountability person and I say, hey, well, I just use my word. So I have a word that I use and they know, okay, that's a 9. And then I utilize those tools. Like every 3 days, I know that I connect with my accountability person. And if they don't hear from me or I don't reach out to them, hey, let's do a check-in. You doing okay? A real quick story. So I got so caught up in what I was doing because I love to create. And I love to, I had created a lot of gatherings within the community that I did quarterly to create a space for women, to heal, and just the fun things in the community, things that I found that I loved that I did. And I got so caught up that I forgot I let that 3-day mark pass. And it was like 10 o'clock at night and I hear this boom, boom, boom at my door. And I'm like, what the heck? And I go to the door and it's the police. They were doing a wellness check, a welfare check. And I was mad at first, but then I was like, okay, I can count on that person to hold me accountable, because it really had slipped my mind because life happens. I was suffering from a TBI because I'd had a series of auto accidents. And so I was like, so remembering things, I had to put things in place to help me remember things. Like I put everything on my calendar on my phone now. For those that battle with PTSD or CPTSD, it impacts your ability, your cognitive, as far as memory. So sometimes you have to use different aids. Don't beat yourself up. I would say that. Just extend grace and more grace and compassion to yourself.
I think a lot of people need to work on that, regardless if, honestly, in my opinion, everyone has trauma. There's the different levels, right?
Yeah.
So everyone needs to have that self-realization and, work on it.
That's part of doing the inner work and being aware of yourself, what your likes are, what your dislikes are, what your non-negotiables are, and being brave enough and courageous enough to stand on them. And that pivots back to setting and sustaining healthy boundaries. Mm-hmm. Because growing up, life has a tendency to try to put chains on our voices. And, those chains can be forged from, our environments, from trauma, from tradition, from social upbringing. But it's up to us to break those chains, to break the chains of silence, because it's not only an attestament of us realizing who we are and our awareness. It's also coming against the opposing forces that are trying to continually silence us. Mm-hmm. And so the best way to do that is to know what your relationship with is. The most important relationship you will ever have in this life, outside of your relationship with your creator, my Abba Father, is your relationship with yourself. And I'll end with this. Self is an acronym. So examine yourself. What is your relationship like with yourself? Is it sabotaging? Is it superficial? Or is it stable? Meaning, do you avoid conflict or do you address conflict head on? Is it emotionless or is it enthusiastic? Do you show up in all your relationships in life numb, not expressing anything, holding everything in, suppressing? Or do you show up enthusiastically, ready to create, a path for others to follow? Is your relationship with yourself loathing or is it loving? Loathing meaning, are you critical of yourself? Do you demean yourself? Do you look in the mirror, as we as women do sometimes, and pick ourselves apart? I've got too much fat here, or, I need to take care of that mole right there, or my face is too fat, or, whatever. Or is it loving? Do you get your checkups? Do you get enough rest? Do you fuel your body with nutrients that are going to help fuel your body? Do you exercise? Do you stretch? Mm-hmm. Do you sustain the boundaries that you set in your life? And are you living life fear-based or faith-based? Fear-based meaning fear of the unknown. You're more comfortable with what you know, even if it's detrimental to you, rather than taking a leap of faith and stepping out into the unknown. Because you never know what you can do until you try. So what is your relationship like with yourself?
One of my favorite quotes is, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Growth happens outside of your comfort zone.
Exactly.
And there was
so
another.
That's how I live my life. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm afraid of heights. And so I forced myself to confront 2 fears that I had. because of my experience in the military, I was afraid of being alone with the opposite sex, especially if they were military. And I was definitely afraid of heights. But there was a fellow veteran of mine, female, that realized that I was really struggling because I had on a firm mask, like everything was okay. And I was falling apart. I had just lost my job, my car, a relationship, my home. And I was like, in my mind, like, Lord, I'm going down. I need a lifeline because if I go down this time, I don't know that I'm coming back. So she volunteered me to go on this retreat that helps disabled veterans reintegrate back into the community. And so I signed up for this retreat. And what it was an expedition over in Peru, climbing the Andes Mountain at 18 feet. And so when I realized what I had gotten myself into, I was like, Michelle, what in the holy hell were you thinking about? Because I'm over here in the middle of these mountains, hiking in snow up to my chest because I'm 5'3". And, everybody around me, I was the only female in a group of 10 disabled veterans and our guides. And I was like, Michelle, you got two choices. They can leave you out here in the middle of nowhere, or you can face this fear, and you're going to have to trust these men around you. So I confronted two fears and I summited that mountain, literally. And that was my paradigm shift. And so as women, we're resilient and we're courageous and we're strong. But because of what we've been told or what has been beaten into us because of our experiences, we dial down, we shrink, we hide. No more hiding, no more being silent. Every time that you confront your fear is a victory. You've conquered it at that time. So don't allow your fears to paralyze you. Use them to propel you and hang on to those anchors, those pillars of support that you have or that you find along the way on this pathway called life. And that's what I've been successful in doing. And that's what I will continue to do because I'm entering into another phase now. I've been here on this earth over 5 decades. And what I'm seeing and what I'm realizing is that, my body is changing. My looks are changing. My thought process is changing. And what I'm seeing and hearing in women that are my age, they still have some challenges with transitioning, with adjusting, going into the next phase. And I'm like, you're only as old as you feel. So I'm still very active because a body in motion stays in motion, and strong body, strong mind. Now I may move a little bit differently in how I take care of my body now, but get out and explore. Life is to be lived. Life is to be explored. You are not your trauma. You are not that thing that caused you to be damaged for a period of time. You may be broken, but you're not defeated. And anything that's broken can be repaired or be redefined.
So what is your advice that you would give to someone who is hesitant and afraid to speak and break that silence, and to empower them to tell their story? Because the story that you just told me over the last 45 minutes has been mind blowing. To be completely honest, some of the shit that you said, I was like, what?
Right.
So what advice would you give someone to be like, again, your trauma is not, your trauma is not defined. How you said it.
You're not defined by your trauma. You're refined by it. So the advice that I would give, if you're listening in, if you are a woman that is on the verge of ending it all, is to know that you matter, you're seen, you're heard, you're important, you deserve a better life than the life that you've encountered. And do not, even if you're afraid to reach out anyway. If you have a foundation of faith, follow the peace of God in your heart for whatever you feel like He's leading you to do. And just face it. You can't heal from what you won't face. My tagline is, if you hide it, you can't heal it. Make the decision and the choice to be silent no more, because you've been silent long enough. And that silence has been eating away at you. It's been eating away at your self-esteem. It's been eating away at your mental, your physical, your relationships. You deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. Last year, the statistics on those that committed suicide was 49,000. That is 49 too many. Don't be that 50 because you matter. That's what I would say.
Where you create these communities so people feel safe and they can talk about their stories, how can someone find this community that you have created?
You can find it through several avenues. So if you reach out to me at www.michellespeakswithaz.com, 2 E's, 2 L's. If you scroll down on the main page, there's a link that says click more to join our Empowered to Thrive community. There's also a link, I believe, to join our mindful movement, or you can just check us out, with a drop in, because moving trauma through the body helps to release you as well. And so that's like a 45 minutes of prayer, devotional, stretching, affirmations, and start your day, because I want to help you unlock your voice. We create and frame our worlds by the things that we speak. It's voice activated. So if you're one of those women that feel like you've been silenced, what you speak is what's going to manifest. So speak life and connect with those that are like-minded. And I'm one of those women, and I'm here to tell you that you can make it and that you will make it. And don't make a permanent decision based on a temporary circumstance. So follow me on Instagram. If you click on the link in the bio, there's a link tree where you can schedule a discovery call with me. It's free. There's no charge for the consultation. I have free components of my community, and there's others that, that you have to invest in, but invest in yourself. And it doesn't necessarily mean monetarily. Invest in yourself, because you deserve to take up space and you deserve to be here on this pathway called life. You can reach out to me on Fiverr. There's a space that I create just to listen. And if I feel that you need additional help, then I have resources to direct you to.
Can someone contact you anonymously and talk to you, or is it confidential? You don't share anything?
Everything is confidential. I share nothing with anyone except for those that you have approved me to be able to share with in case of emergency. So everything is completely confidential. What you share with me stays with me. And I have to abide by that. I'm a certified life recovery coach, so I cannot disclose anything without your written permission. And so, but because I have lived experience, I know what it means to feel like you're in an environment where you can be safe to really share. And if you can go on my YouTube and listen to some testimonials of women that have been in the community, listen to some testimonials of women that have gone through my program. So I'm not sharing anything that I have not lived and that I have not heard from those that have been a part of my community or have gone through my program. And there's other organizations out there, again, NAMI, RAIN. So there's resources that are available to you. You just have to take the first step to, one, begin to trust yourself again, and two, to know that we can't do this thing called life alone, because we are created to commune. It's hardwired in our DNA. So trust yourself and trust your intuition and trust your instincts.
And I would strongly suggest, especially if you are a female military service or female veteran, she has lived that through that aspect. And so connecting on something so narrowed down could be extremely powerful. And I know she's mentioned community and accountability and coaching. And I wanted to kind of, say something on top of that is, when you have someone who is your accountability person or your coach or whatever, confidant or whatever you want to call them, they're going to be also asking you those tough questions that you need to answer, because sometimes we get too comfortable into being like, we want to feel safe. So we stay safe, but these coaches, these mentors, these accountability people are going to get you out of that comfort zone so you can do that additional healing. They're going to ask you those hard questions.
Right. And I thank you for bringing that up, Brittany. I'm a safe space. And, people always say that my voice is very soothing. And then when they're in my presence, they feel very calm and such a sense of peace. But I'm also very firm. I'm easy on the individual, but hard on the issue. And so if you're a part of the community, or if you do any of the online courses, or, embark upon one-on-one, there are deliverables. There are interactive exercises, activities, and things that you have to do. And before you can move to the next phase, you have to complete that phase. And I am available to you in any of the programs, once a week. I'm available for at least 15 minutes a day. If you get to a place that you feel like you've hit a wall. And so I will hold you accountable, because you're stronger than you think. But I'm not going to do it in a way that's going to break your spirit or that's going to damage you on the pathway to journey, because I know what that feels like. And it almost took me out of there. So I will not do that. And I'm very intuitive. I'm very sensitive, because you're sensitive to what you've come out of. Along with the training comes the lived experiences. I think having a balance of both is essential to being able to connect with those that you're on the pathway with, because I'm partnering with you. I'm not doing it for you. And that's
important. Do the work.
Yeah, that's important. And so if you are in a space or have an accountability partner that is catering to you being in that safe place and not challenging you to grow, that's not a reliable accountability partner. And, as a free giveaway to you, Brittany has a link to things, what to look for in an accountability partner. So, you have some tools, some tangible takeaway tools, but you have to utilize them, and you have to take the first step, because nobody knows where you are unless you open your mouth and share where you are.
And I will definitely add that into the show notes as well as ways to contact her. Yes, you do have a very soothing voice, and I have felt at ease for this past hour. So ladies, honestly, if you are dealing with trauma, you want to take that first step, you want to work at it, please reach out to Michelle. She's been there. She knows what you're going through. She's clearly an incredible woman. So stay connected with her. Please reach out to her. Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your empowering and resilient story. Like, again, you've blown my mind on some of the shit that you've dealt with.
Thank you so much for having me on, Brittany. And I want to thank you for paving the way and creating a voice for women vets, because we have served too. And we need to be recognized, and we need to be not validated, but acknowledged. So thank you for what you're doing, paving the way. And if I had any parting thoughts, emotions are meant to be expressed, not suppressed. So don't feel ashamed for expressing your emotions. We were given a full spectrum of emotions to express. And being in the military, of course, we were trained not to express them. But don't be afraid to show compassion. Don't be afraid to express your emotions. Don't be afraid to show up, especially for you.
Well said. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Again, thank you so much, Michelle, for, taking the time out of your day. Again, if you guys have any questions, please reach out to one of us. Again, thank you for listening. And until next time, we'll see you next week.
Take care.